After the technical problems we had a few weeks ago, today we have again Mrs. Aristeguieta to talk about Venezuela and other issues. Maria Alejandra Aristeguieta, former Venezuelan ambassador of President Juan Guaido, political analyst. She lives in Geneva in Switzerland. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. De Filippis.
Today's topic is mainly Venezuela, but I would like to have your opinion on what is happening in a neighboring country, Colombia. Protests against the government's reckless policies are justified because the President Duque has committed so many mistakes. But the strategy seems planned for other reasons. What's your opinion?
I entirely agree. There are similarities with what has happened in Chile, in Ecuador, in Peru, even in the United States, and to some extent in Mexico. We have seen there's a pattern that's been going on, and watching what all the images that we have seen the last couple of days, the last weeks, it reminds me of Venezuela in 1989 when the first protest started, and of course it reminded me later on how demonstrations and how pacific demonstrations were turned into looting and turned into bloodshed.
Would a ruined regime like the Venezuelan one really have the means to support the destabilization operations like this in other countries? Is it possible? Are they so strong? Do they have the financial means to do so?
Oh yes, the Venezuelan regime is far from being ruined. It's smuggling out gold from the Arco Minero. It's smuggling its old gold reserves. They still have they have financial relations with China, with Turkey, with some Arab states, and of course with Russia. So they are moving money around, and it's far from they're far from being ruined or. Let's say that sanctions are an excuse when it comes to some other things, but I think they are comfortable with financing this kind of looting and this kind of destabilization around the region.
Venezuela is a country that was already in deep suffering and that is now even more in difficulty due to the coronavirus pandemic. The government refuses to provide real data. There are no vaccines. People find themselves in the need to go out every day to look for food to survive. But people cannot respect the so-called barrier gestures. It is a catastrophic situation. Mrs. Aristeguieta, what can you tell us and what can be done?
Well, the short answer is we need to address the root causes. And when I say we, I'm referring not just to the Venezuelan opposition, I'm referring to the international community as well. Let's step back for a moment and look at what has happened. This is a regime, an illegitimate government that has dismantled the whole country. There's no food, no medicines, no electricity, no water, no health system. There are no public policies. So we cannot expect them to solve a problem when they have created it, when they have actually created it. The salary right now is around $3 to $4 a day. I'm not quite sure. It keeps going down. I'm sorry, it's $1 a month, $4 a month. And a doctor's appointment, for instance, is $100 because the economy has been dollarized. So we need to attack the root causes and forget about trying to go into a more moderate or step-by-step strategy.
Many people do not know what it means when you say that an economy is dollarized. In fact, we've heard that US was the biggest enemy, the big devil, so to speak, for the Venezuelan regime. How is it possible that they have accepted the dollar and not for instead the yuan, because they were very near to the Chinese regime?
Their own reserves are in dollars. And for me, the reason is very clear. They say their speech goes in one direction, and the reality goes in a different direction. This is part of the same strategy of confusing and creating chaos. And of course, the dollar is also related to remittances that have been sent by the 5 million Venezuelans that live abroad, and we send money to our families. So that's it's also part of capturing that industry around remittances.
We try to understand and to explain the relationships between the European Union and Venezuela. There are many problems within the European Union. The management of the vaccination, the strategy in Europe is a disaster. The Venezuelan drama is probably not at the top of the agenda of European leaders, and we can understand the reason why. But what is the perception right now, according to you, of what is happening in Venezuela?
My perception of what is going on in Venezuela is that everybody is lost. We have lost track of sense of direction. I think the international community is more or less in the same situation. They are trying to get some things out of the regime, but not as many as they would have hoped for a couple of years back. And my sense from Europe, from my views from as a European and as a analyst from Europe, I can see that the Europeans have also an agenda that's very complicated to agree on. We saw at the end of last year, for instance, a bi-regional meeting between foreign ministers, and it was led by Germany, which was holding the presidency of the EU at that moment, and Mr. Borrell. And then we saw a meeting of the Ibero-American summit, where Maduro was invited. To the first one, to the bi-regional informal meeting, Maduro was not invited. To the other one that was held a couple of weeks back, the Maduro regime was invited. So these contradictions just simply don't help to have a clear strategy, a clear roadmap, specifically.
I'm interested in your perception. Up to a couple of years ago, we had Mr. Tajani, president of the European Parliament, and we had the feeling that the European Union was more keen to listen to what is happening in Venezuela. Things have changed. Now, in some countries like Italy, some MPs organize events, try to talk about this issue, about Venezuela in general. But we don't see, and I don't know if you share my opinion, a European strategy. What's your opinion about that?
There is a European strategy. It's a different strategy. It's not the same strategy that we saw when Tajani was there. It's not the same strategy that helped give some visibility to the Venezuelan tragedy. It's a totally different strategy. It's more to do with slowly negotiating to rip some results from a negotiation in the hope of getting some results from a negotiation. And this is how Norway gets in. This is why the international contact group steps in to moderate, to give it a more moderate dimension. And this moderate dimension, it has to be contrasted against the urgency, the urgency of the Venezuelan people, the citizens that are dying, that are arbitrarily detained, that are fleeing the country. So, of course, for Europe, that needs to take into account 28, 27 visions. It's very difficult, it's very complicated to agree to to one course of action. But at the same time, they need to have this sense of urgency that has been lost, specifically in the last 6 months, probably.
The European Commission, which is the most important, one of the most important institutions within the European Union, has started to develop kind of politics towards Latin America. Relationships have improved, but I have the feeling that it's only the economic part which is considered. Do you think that the European Union now has the knowledge about of what is happening in Venezuela, about the problems with human rights issues and all this kind of stuff?
Of course, they have the knowledge. They've been very active at the UN. They have been supporting the UN resolutions, specifically at the Human Rights Council. They have been seeing what's going on at the ILO. They have been seeing what's been going on at the WHO with COVAX and the vaccination mechanism. They know what's going on at the WTO. They know they're actors. They're fundamental actors, and of course they were very much at the top of Venezuela was very much at the top of the agenda in 2019. What's striking is, for instance, in this bi-regional meeting that I was referring to that was held last December. What was striking was that Borrell said, for instance, that there had been no Latin American summit in the past 5 years, which means that there had been no relationship, no close relationship with Latin America. And one of the reasons why he wanted to bring it back to the European agenda was because Mercosur's, the agreement with Mercosur, an agreement with Chile, and an agreement with a trade agreement with Mexico, Chile, and the Mercosur were very important. Now, this is, for me, from what I've been reading, this has to do with increasing trade options for European companies, increasing trade options after the pandemic. We are all going to go through an economic downturn because of the pandemic. Now we need to have a broader market, and this is why this was brought to the European agenda. It's not about democracy. It's not about human rights. It's not about stabilizing a continent that it's just blowing. It's blowing into pieces.
You explained us in another interview, in another occasion, about why United Nations have to talk to Nicolás Maduro, because they talk to states, to governments, and unfortunately the official governments, so to say, at least is the Nicolás Maduro one. But I'd like to know if what are the limits of the international interference? And I'm not talking about military interference, but also about economic pressure, media interference. Is it possible? And something is changing in the United Nations, within the United Nations, in order to solve the problem of the Venezuelan country, of the Venezuelan people?
Is that a question? It sounds more like you're affirming something, and I would tend to agree with that.
I don't know. I mean, it's something I was told several times, and I'd like to know if, in your opinion, because you are also a former diplomat, if something is changing even in the perception of people.
There's nothing. Actually, it's changed to the worse. In 2019, there was some euphoria. We saw a strong Lima group leading the way. We saw the United States very active. We saw the Europeans dragging their feet specifically because of one or two countries, because of Spain, because of Italy, to some extent because of Greece. Once Greece elections were over, we could count Greece out, or we could count Greece into the group of countries that were pushing for democratization of Venezuela. But it is very much trying to slow things down and to come to a moderate solution. And that's something that it has to do not just with the coalitions at the European level, but also with the perception that the European left tends to have about Venezuela or any other country led by a leftist ideology. Whether this is a leftist ideology or not, that's a different thing, but that's what they have been bought into. Now, are the Europeans acting strongly enough? I think they have far more instruments. We have seen far more instruments, especially in the past. We don't see them that much anymore. I think there tends to be a kind of fright, a scaredness of what's been of public opinion, what can be said by the media, and instead of trying to work with the media and explain to the media why this is important and this has to do with European values of democracy and respect for human rights, they just shy away, and they'd rather not touch upon those issues that might be uncomfortable to deal with with the public opinion.
I have the feeling the European Union is stuck in this unanimity complex. It's very extremely complicated to put 27 heads under one head. So how is it possible? What should the opposition do, or what should other organizations do in order to attract the attention, in order to be heard, and to make clear that what is happening in Venezuela is a real drama?
Well, there are many questions in your one question. The opposition needs to have a unique agenda. The Venezuelan opposition needs to have a unique agenda. They don't have a unique agenda, while the regime, the legitimate government, has a unique agenda, and they're just defending themselves, and they just want to stay in power. The opposition has as many agendas as political leaders you may find. You have some people that want the application of R2P. You have some people that want to cope with the government in order to re-establish the possibilities of vote and regional and regional and local elections. So these are the two extremes, and you can find all sorts of different positions in the middle. I don't want to go into the details of which one should work or not, because I don't think it's a question of what should work or what would work, but rather how the political leaders are positioning themselves. And I think they're not putting Venezuela at the forefront of this discussion. They are putting their own particular agenda, their individual agendas, their party agendas, and not their and not the country as such. And we see it all along, and that's something that for the regime is very easy to work and divide and conquer, because it knows that different people have an appetite for different kinds of power, and if they just give that that bit of power to that person, they will end up neutralizing that person or that political party. That's what's been going on, and it's as old as as time. This is divide and conquer, deceit, and you will be able to stay there for forever.
Maduro's propaganda is based on money, but what are the relations between the regime and the World Interparliamentary Union? And can you explain us what is it?
Well, the Interparliamentary Union has the representation of all of the world parliaments, and a few weeks back, maybe a month already, we had a delegation coming from the legitimate assembly coming to Geneva to get some legitimization from the Interparliamentary Union. They want to get invited and accredited for the next conference, and their argument is that they are the sole representatives of the Venezuelan people. Whether they get an invitation or not, it remains to be seen. The problem here is that we have two governments. So we have an illegitimate government, we have an illegitimate assembly, we have an illegitimate court. So it's a de facto government. Are we going to accept de facto governments into the union? Probably yes, because the world is full of de facto governments, of dictatorships around the world, and they have phony parliaments that work that can address international conferences. They have representatives at the UN. So yes, this is a very cynical situation, and I think the UN was not created for this kind of environment, this kind of scenario.
Maybe I'm a little naive, but how is it possible that characters like Jorge Rodriguez can travel freely to Europe, where, I mean, there are no sanctions against the Venezuelan leaders, so against the Maduro's leaders?
There are several, and from several countries: Canada, United States, the European Union, Switzerland, Panama. Yes, there are, and some Lima Group countries, but not all of them have been sanctioned. And in the case of Jorge Rodriguez, as far as I know, he has not been sanctioned. None of the members of that delegation that came to Geneva have been sanctioned. I have a source that's uru.org. She keeps up, this is a journalist in Venezuela. She keeps up all the different sanctions by country. So she's got a huge chart with all the different sanctions and the different countries. And I checked when they came over, and they were not there.
You wrote a couple of articles about the experience with ILO. Can you tell us something about this and about what is doing Caracas in order to find legitimacy all over the world?
At ILO, there has been, just as there was at the Human Rights Council, there was a complaint on the side of the employers. This is a tripartite organization with the employers addressed a complaint that on the violation of certain laws and mechanisms to dealt with not just employees but workers as well. And there was a commission of inquiry, just like the fact-finding mission at the Human Rights Council. In the context of the ILO, there was this commission of inquiry that had a report, a very severe report, with more than 200 testimonies, specifically from workers that had been affected, arbitrarily detained, persecuted, etc. And the government decided, the Venezuelan regime decided that they would not accept this report or take it into account to correct those policies. Now, the ILO is different from the Human Rights Council in the sense that if you do not comply with you do not enforce the report recommendations, if you do not comply with the treaties, you can be taken to a further step, which would mean a kind of a suspension of the country from the ILO, and it would mean that it would open the doors to any kind of sanctions around the world. And this has been seen just once before, and it's been seen with Myanmar and forced labor. It took a couple of years, but in the end, they were forced to comply with ILO ruling and with the international standards on labor. So what we expect is, and we were hoping that this would be applicable to Venezuela as well, but the European trade unionist and in the context of the ILO, the workers that were supporting both countries and employers decided that they would step down from a global agreement to ensure compliance from the Venezuelan government, and are now defending the Venezuelan government. It's very difficult to understand. I tried to reach out to them. They would not listen. They have bought into the script or the narrative that because this comes from the employers, it's bad, and they're not seeing what's going on with Venezuelan workers. So maybe it's a good opportunity to make an appeal to workers representatives at the ILO from Europe to take to stand up and defend Venezuelan workers at the ILO.
My last question. Nowadays, many wars are not conducted with weapons, but are more economic wars. So within the ILO, there are, I assume, countries like or within the international community, there are countries like India, like China. They want to be more important, to play a bigger role in the international relationships. Countries like China, for instance, do understand or start to understand that maybe it's not good business to do business with the regime. Do they start to think that probably it's better to support a democratic change in order to make real business in a rich country like yours?
I don't think so. I think in terms of international in terms of international organizations, for China, it's very interesting to it gives it a lot of leverage to have developing countries on its side. So this is something that both the United States and the Europeans need to take into account when you go into a negotiation, into multilateral negotiation, and all the systemic the way it works, the dynamics that takes place at the UN. For China, it's very important to have developing countries on its side, and it plays that card very, very often. It plays the card of I'm the one who's going to protect you. You're a smaller country, so you side with me, and I will side with you. And you can see it in most fora. You can see the same dynamic spreading out. So I don't think the Chinese are thinking of losing that. I think it's giving them a lot of leverage, and they want to become. They have clear aspirations to become a world power. They are already a world power. Now they want to be the first power in this new balance, in this new power balance.
And sorry, the really last question about European companies. There are companies like Air France, Alitalia. They have lost and they are losing a bunch of money, a lot of money in Venezuela because they cannot operate in the country. So they would need stability in order to have a flourishing, a good business. Is it possible, or could it be possible to use these kind of issues to make kind of a lobbying with the European Union, with the European Commission, in your opinion?
I think they have been doing that, and you can see it. You can see the way it's unfolding. And we go back to that meeting at the end of last year, that bi-regional informal meeting. The way the agenda is unfolding, it seems that it's going in that direction. Europe should focus on its core values and should think of all these or put this trade and economic interests in a longer term balance, in a broader balance. You cannot have good trade, good investments in a country that has no rule of law. So this is a short-term win, and I don't think it's fair to say that it's going to give results. It's going to give results to the European companies. It's going to give short-term results, but in the long term, they will again have the same difficulties that they were having, a couple of years back. Because if you don't have any economic stability, you cannot. If you don't have rules and laws that protect investments and that protect companies, and you're at the mercy of the government, the dictator, then you cannot operate freely. You cannot operate profitably.
Maria Alejandra Aristeguieta, thanks a lot.
Thank you again.